Well, hello on this beautiful day, wherever you are. I'm lucky enough to be in West Palm Beach, and our guest is in Maryland, so I'm assuming the weather is good there too. And our beautiful guest is Ching Sun, who is the author of Once Our Lives, and it's a longer title than that, but I'll let her talk about it. And she is also a columnist for the Santa Monica Star and has her own website. So, Ching, say hello to our listeners.
Hello, everybody. And thank you so much, Mimi, for having me on your show.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm excited. I was reading your book last night and oh, I couldn't put it down. And let's talk about that. Now, what is the full title of your book?
The full title is Once Our Lives, Love, Death, and in the, life, love, death in the Middle Kingdom. So it has a subtitle, but most important part of my title is Once Our Lives. It kind of gives me a nostalgic feeling about what once was my life. And now I'm so far removed from it. So it was a totally just like I feel like it's my inner voice of what I feel about my past life.
I relate to that a lot. When I wrote my memoir, Raised by Wolves, Trapped by Demons, the first half of my life is so awful and violent and terrible. And the second half of my life is wonderful. And it's almost like I'm two different people. So I kind of, yeah, kind of relate to what you're saying. So, what inspired you to write the book?
Well, when you live a life like what I had, and born in a shanty town, left in the crib for the first 2 years of your life. My mother did not abuse me or abandon me. My mother had to go out and make money so that we would have food. And my father was in a bamboo forest, so he was very far removed from the family. The only reason he joined that was because he wanted my mother to have a doctor. And in order to have a doctor to deliver me in the hospital, he had to find the work. And the time, it was during the Great Chinese Famine, and where 30 to 50 million people died of starvation in China. So it was extremely impossible situation to find a job. They tried very hard for a few years and they couldn't find a job. So eventually he got a job that had an attachment to it, and he had to be removed from family for like 3 years. So that's the reason why he wasn't home.
Yeah.
And my father thought that he was making enough money for my mother and two little girls, but he did not know that the company kept half of the pay for his so-called lodging. So his food and a room and a board, which was a tent in the forest. But my mother did not receive enough money from his company to feed the two little girls and herself. So she was forced to go out. And it was so from such a beginning of your life to I'm now living a middle class American existence and right in the heart of the nation. I always moved forward. My life was, I felt from the very beginning, I was born in the bottom of a canyon. And the day I was born, my mother encouraged me to climb up and up and up. Never, ever looked backwards because it was just too painful. And plus, it kind of will distract you from your ambition of moving forward. So it was when my mother passed away.
I'm
When
going to
my mother
stop you
passed
there,
away,
sweetheart. I want to
yeah.
stop you there because I don't want you to just tell the whole story of the book. I want to go a little deeper, and I will get back to that, but let's go back a little bit. So,
Mm-hmm.
both my parents worked too. And in the 50s and 60s, that wasn't the norm. Mom stayed at home, but my parents both worked. So from the time I was 5, I had 3 siblings. I raised them. I was their mother, right? And being left in that crib and things that happened to me when I was 5 put feelings of abandonment down deep. Do you feel like you had some feelings of abandonment as you grew older?
Very interestingly, I think that there are several types of physical and emotional traumas. Some, if you could attribute to the real negligence, I think probably what, funniest thing for me is I have a pretty healthy attitude. I probably wouldn't have ever known that I was in that crib for 2 years had my mother not told me, because I had an issue of um, being potty trained, obviously. I could not sit, I could not walk, I could not eat. My older sister, luckily, because she was 2, that government nurseries would take her. So she actually was not left behind. But they would not take any children under the age of 2. China was very poor at the time. So they just essentially had a huge room where someone was watching the children. They did not want any infant. So my mother had to leave me behind. Now, in a normal situation, I didn't have to be left behind. You have to understand that we were in a shanty town. My father built a tiny wooden hut against his parents. Now, in the bigger hut, there were my grandparents, and my father had 5 sisters and a brother. And you would think any of them could have heard a little baby crying, and would someone would be kind enough to go over and hold me and take me out of the crib and would love me. But it didn't happen.
That's
I think
amazing.
that in this situation was it was compounded, because my father was the first son and grandson born to a family who was very well to do, and my grandmother believed that it was a wandering spirit that came and begged for food from her for a week and decided that that's why he was seeking the host. He wanted to join my grandmother's family. So
Uh,
my grandmother believed that the spirit jumped into my father, and because of that, my father was doomed even before he was born to
uh,
have a horrible life.
yes. And
So,
I'm gonna relate. I relate to my relate. I'm gonna let you know I relate. When my third, when the third sibling was born in my family, big family, grandmother, a lot of aunts, and my brother was 4 and I was 5. And when my mother was going to have my brother, my father took myself and my little brother to an orphanage, and he put us in the orphanage for a week. Similar, right? Because when I grew up, and I tried to have them explain that why with my grandmother and everything, right? Well, we weren't getting along. So I so totally can compassion you when you find out that she thought he was possessed and that was the reason. That's so,
well, she did blame herself partially for it for the rest of her life, which turned her from a rather sympathetic 19-year-old young woman when she was giving birth to my father to a very, very critical and complaining and sulking type of person. So that was the grandmother who I knew growing up, who actually never liked us because she believed they was the beggar who brought all the bad luck and brought 4 little girls to my family and ended up not having one single boy to carry on the family name. So that kind of a put the perspective, I didn't really understand. I was a little kid, but growing up, I always felt that my grandmother didn't like me. That was for sure. And nobody in my father's family cared for us. So that left my mother, who was very vulnerable and had to defend herself for everything. And I think, you mean, she had no choice but to go out to work because her husband was in a bamboo forest far away. Her in-laws family was not helping her. So she had no choice but left me in a crib. So and also I did not really know all those things. My mother told me because she did not want me to feel ashamed of myself,
Oh.
for not being potty trained. And she never would complain about anything in the middle of the night, in the winter. I was sleeping with my older sister, and I have memory that she put me standing on the floor. So she quickly, it was like a military drill. She knew where the dry bedding was, and she knew how to put on clothes for me and then tuck me again into the bed. And it was only the next day I could hear the complaint from my older sister that I knew that I did quite a few times. And my mother, when my younger sister was potty trained, 2 years younger than me. So my mother would tell me those things. She was very regretful. She ended up actually precious thing she had. She went to a pharmacist, and did some sort of a dealing, got in calcium pills and fish oil. And she decided to stay home with me and take care of me so I could walk and I would talk and I would be a normal kid. But to trade for that, she had to go to the morning market in search of spoiled vegetables, anything people were throwing away and possibly could be used as food. And so that my older sister and my mother and could live, and she could give me rice milk. You know that I grew up with no milk at all, not even powdered milk. My mother would make a pot of rice. And when she was making the rice, she would put in an extra glass of water. And then when the rice is bubbling and there's a thick kind of gooey stuff on the top, and then she would put a spoonful of sugar in the baby bottle and then skim out the thick gooey stuff into the baby bottle to feed me. That was before the solid food was introduced. That's how poor. But that 30 to 50 million people died of starvation. I have lived, and I really contribute everything to my mother. But we lived in an extremely hostile world at the time. A natural disaster with relatives and the people who didn't really care for us. So, in a sense, that kind of and it was a lot of cultural. I was abused culturally because I was a girl. Now, in your situation in China, you probably wouldn't be in my boat because you had a brother. Now, if my grandmother would have a grandson, then she wouldn't have cared that much because she would have want that grandson, and she would be very thankful to my mother for
Oh,
having a grandson. But she did not. She did
yeah,
not get a grandson.
I get that. So there's definitely a strong theme in your book of not just the poverty that you grew up in, but the whole society at that time was experiencing, a lot of them, because of this famine, correct?
Yes.
Talk about that a lot. So we get the history of what was going on. And
Yes,
time,
was bad.
what time frame was that, would you say?
Well, it was around 1957, I believe. The approaching the imminent famine may have started in the further away area, more remote area, probably even in 1956. What happened was my parents really had a hard time. My father actually was in love with a young woman whose family felt that they did not want their only daughter to be married to the shanty town. So they refused. They would not let a daughter marry my father. My father was so lovesick. He felt that he had to leave the shanty town, leave everything behind. At the time, 1957, early in the year, the China was very young. China was found communist, the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949. And so 57, they were exploring the possibility of opening the Western frontier, part of the Silk Road, which was very near to Soviet Union, and they were on a good relationship. So they called the young people from the coastline, the East Coast, and said, join us in building our country in the West, the great frontier. So my father felt it was a great opportunity for him to leave. So he took the opportunity. He jumped onto the train with a bedroll and a change of clothes and a couple of dollars in his pocket. And he felt that he was sick and tired of the city who he couldn't love because he was in the shanty town. So he left. And then my mother, who actually was living a much better existence at the time, my grandfather, my mother had 3 identities. She was born with a name, but when she was a little child, her mother gave her away to her cousin, to my grandmother's cousin. And because the cousin had no children, the Chinese culture believed that if you're childless and you adopt a child, and it would kind of induce some sort of a motherly nature in yourself out. And then you might be able to have your own children. So my mother was given away. She was old enough to understand her mother gave her away, but too young to really comprehend and understand. She really did not have a good time, even though she was taken from the seaside village to the big metropolitan city of Shanghai before communism taking over. And
So
her new...
Yeah, but your mother, I see the benefit that she was giving her sister by giving you to her. But what was the benefit for your mother? Was it just she was doing it because of the love she had for her sister?
Oh, there's no benefit for my mother at the time. My mother was a little girl, a little child. At the time, people gave away, they never gave away boys. They always gave away girls. So she was being generous to her cousin. My 2 grandmothers actually shared a grandmother themselves. So you can't understand the relationship.
How
So
old
if you
was
give away,
when she had you?
I think it was somewhere like 5, 6 years old. She was
Whoa,
young.
whoa, whoa. And back up. Your mother got pregnant and had a child when she was how old?
No. My
Yes.
mother herself was
Yeah.
given away.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. But how old was she when she had you?
She had me. She was in her 20s.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just want
Late 20s. Yeah. Late
so this
20s.
was something that was accepted, done all the time. You know, you need a child. I have a child. Here's my child. It just part of your culture.
Yeah. But my mother was traumatized for life. Until the end of her life, she always asked the question, why me? Why she had other 4 sisters? Why not the other 4 sisters? Why her?
So it
And
wasn't her
she...
idea. It wasn't her idea. Whose idea was it to give you to her sister? It
No.
just
To my grandmother, my birth grandmother, my blood grandmother, gave my mother away to her cousin. So I had 2 grandmothers. I have 2 grandmothers who I related. They were cousins.
okay.
My mother was given away.
Right.
And yeah, so my mother's second father, her new father, was the general manager of a watch and clock shop called a Wellington Watch and Clock Shop in the British section of the city of Shanghai. So they were very well to do.
Okay.
And but because my mother was a girl, she was not allowed to go to school, even though the family had all the money.
Yes.
So my grandfather realized that my mother was very smart. So what he did was he said he would tutor my mother himself. So they lived across the street, right on Nanjing Road, the old British section. And usually only the foreigners could afford to live, but my grandparents lived there. My mother would walk across that main street to my grandfather's office and got tutored. When she did well, she would be given a gold watch, the newest um, collection from Switzerland.
Mhm.
So throughout her life, as life went down and down, she sold all her watches. The last watch she sold was to trade for my calcium and fish oil, so that she felt that was a way for me to learn to walk and to strengthen my bone and to help me. So my mother, people that say like, oh, you know, you had a good life, you had a servants, you live in the fanciest part of town. She was extremely unhappy. Also, her new mother was very young, was much younger than my own grandmother. So she did not treat my mother well. She was very abusive. She used to hold a whole handful of mahogany chopsticks and smash my mother on the head.
Oh,
She was so bad to the servants. The maid, the cook would be running away every period so often enough that my mother felt. My mother was like 12 years old. She tried to learn how to cook because my grandmother wouldn't touch any of the things. But when my mother learned try to cook, my grandmother would hit her, physically beat her. And once my grandmother got so angry at my mother because she was cooking and she had to go to the bathroom, so she wetted herself. My grandmother pushed a huge pot of boiling soup off my mother's hand and burned her foot. It was
oh,
so badly scarred. All my life long, I saw my mother's foot, the scar on my mother's foot. I can even see it right now.
mm,
And so my mother actually did not have good mothers. Her birth mother, you know, the one who gave away, she
yes.
never liked the children. She was always playing mahjong. So with her friends. So my mother was an infant, was crawling on the bed, and she dropped herself off the bed and hit a porcelain chamber pot right on the forehead. Her
Mhm.
forehead was bleeding, like blood was just pouring out.
Mhm.
My grandmother called a servant to get a pot of flour, and she essentially just grabbed a handful of flour and put it on the bleeding area to stop the bleeding. And that's all she did for my mother. Now, they lived in a seaside village. There was no doctor, but also you could see that my birth grandmother was not really a child caring, loving mother
No,
either.
no.
So my mother's two mothers, my mother had scars from head to foot.
I would
That
think
on
so.
the head,
I would think
from the
so.
head,
Yeah.
physically from the head, she would always point to me. My mother did this to me, and then her adopted mother did it to her foot. So from head to toe. So I think
Yes.
considering what she went through, she was really a good mother to me. She never hid anything. She would tell me the reason why she did what, and she would always encourage me. She felt somehow, I think there was a lot of unfulfilled
Yeah.
wishes inside her. She wanted to go to school so badly. She wanted me to go to school, do well. So I think she was seeing me, my life, as an extension of her own life.
The thing is too, and you're bringing up an important point about, you know, what your parents experienced, any bad experiences, then it shapes how they are going to be, of course. Most women, I believe, would want to be a better mother than their mother was, but not always. Now, my mother, I grew up feeling she never liked me. And when she was older, I put her in a nursing home. I found the best nursing home for her. She told everybody she was hated me for that. And I went to see her. Now, she was in Pennsylvania. I was in Florida. She had 4 children, and 3 of those children lived in Pennsylvania. I saw her the most. I took care of every need. I went to her when she was dying, and I had given her a journal to write down her life, anything about her life that she wanted me to know. And in the journal, one of the questions was, how did you feel when you found out you were pregnant with me? Now, my mother knew after she died that I would have that journal. And she wrote in that journal, well, we didn't have any money. So I jumped up and down off the stairs and I took mustard baths and tried to get rid of you.
Oh.
Now, she knew I was going to read that, and it's amazing what people are dark sometimes in their soul. And I know she had a bad childhood, but still, what hurt me the most was that she wrote it down for me to read. Let's talk about your writing process. How did you get into making sure that your message, your theme, and your insights got into your writing?
Well, I felt it's extremely important as a writer to really use your inner voice. Let the inside you come out. Don't put too many obstacles and that, like worry about being ashamed or worried about how people would judge you and worry about all different things, consequences. Yes. The only thing I didn't want to talk about is politics, because about is ordinary people, especially doing extraordinary things and living through extraordinary times. And I felt that kind of can link and connect all the women together, because no matter where you are, you could be an island of Africa, you could be in Antarctica or anywhere, that most of us are considered to be ordinary. And then yet we're doing so many things that are so extraordinary all our lives. And especially during the extraordinary times like a war, revolution, or a family crisis, you know that there are different frames of social context. The larger ones will be the international, and then what's going on in your country, and then what's going on in your neighborhood, immediate city, in your family, and all these different frames of social contexts could create a lot of dynamics and a lot of negative, challenging, and difficult. So during these times, how as ordinary people we can do extraordinary things. And I think that it could be inspirational. Now, if you think that anybody lived such a perfect story like a fairy tale, I think that it's not true, because I don't believe any one of us living, especially the longer you live, right?
Yes.
The more you realize the world is not a perfect place. As long as we humans would inhabit in a place, we create so much. And there are a lot of things that you say, I say, I'm sure from your mother's perspective, she really felt like, she just did this because she felt this was the best thing in the world, and she did not want another child, so she could get rid of you. The one thing I felt, at least she was honest with you. There are a lot of parents won't even tell you what the problem is.
I think I think from my perspective and my feelings and emotions would have not to have told me, but if you were going to tell me in person while you were alive and explain to me what was going on. But she didn't, which made me feel that I was unloved and unwanted. And
I think there was certain resentment I could feel.
yes, yes,
Probably she felt that all the griefs and all the responsibility and the time and trouble she
yeah,
took to raise you, she has grievances against that. And unfortunately, she had anything against about her duties and responsibilities because it's caused by you. So everything ended
yes.
up
Mhm.
directed toward you, which is
Yeah.
a very sad thing. That's one thing I felt that as we mature, grow older, and I'm just so happy when you talk about this, you are so in control of the story. You can talk about it without crying, without vibrating any negative feelings, which I have a lot of admiration for you because I
Okay.
can tell you all my life I hated my grandmother. I
Mm.
hated my grandmother for so much. It just kind of formed the little seeds when you're a little child, grown into a big tree of hatred for my grandmother. Now, when
Yes.
I was writing the book, it
Mhm.
took me all the way back. And what I tried to do was like Christmas Carol. You more try to get yourself detached from the story. You fly over the scenes of the past
Oh.
and the present, and you see things very objectively. And only then I realized how the social, you know, the
Mhm.
history had an impact on what had become of my grandmother by the
Yeah.
time that I knew her. I think I have lost a lot of the hatred. I started to understand the whole thing because I wrote the book, because I became my own counselor in a sense that I
Absolutely.
have seen through the whole thing unfolding without me being the center of it, but more
Yes.
me as a character.
Oh, I love that you said that because when I wrote my book, I wrote it um, in a way that I could look at what happened and now understand why my parents are the way they were, or the men that I had in my life that were very toxic, damaged men. And I could get into the psychological aspect and the damage of that person causing the damage to me. And it was very cathartic to do that. And I think that's what you were doing. You were looking down at what happened and you were the storyteller. You weren't necessarily the character in the book. You were the storyteller. That about it? Yes?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, very, very much so. I think it's extremely important to be
Yes.
a storyteller. And by the way, no one knows your story better than yourself because you went through it. You don't have to be, these are nonfiction, but you don't have to like be fanciful thinking about the, I mean, like you can dream of seeing a prince with Prince Charming or make up stories. But this is actually down to the real life. Every little nail, every little piece of fabric you have lived through. So I do believe that for those people who lived an extraordinary life, I consider your life to be extraordinary, and I consider my life to be extraordinary. Any women who had lived such an extraordinary life, unique with lots of challenges, I think that we should have our stories told
Oh,
because we could inspire a lot of other women. Nothing else, at least they can feel they are not alone facing the abuse, no matter where they come from, whether they are inflicted by culture, by history, or by their own families, by the people who they love deeply. But I think it's extremely important that they understand, and it will help them, give them a healthier attitude to face what they have to face.
Yes. And the thing that you're talking about too, cultural impact on other cultures, because people might say, other cultures might, oh, she lived in America. She grew up in the United States. She had a wonderful life because she grew in the United States. And I grew up poor in, a Middle East country where women couldn't do anything. But I will not, of course, they went through terrible things. But I did not have the life of a princess because I lived in the United States. That did not happen for me. So I think when you and I write our stories truthfully, and I know for myself, I put in good and bad about myself because there were things that I had to do to take care of my two daughters. And I put that in there. And mistakes that I made, I put that in there because I'm not writing a fairy tale or fiction. I am writing my life. And I think the same of you. Like you, tell me how you got from China to the United States. How did that happen?
Well, I believe education was my ticket. Since my mother always had all these, the dream that she had to be educated, she put that dream on me. And I always felt I grew up so poor, my toes sticking out of my shoes, my elbows were patched, and other kids would tease me and they were abusive around me. So I felt that the only way I made myself shine was that I could do better, in school.
Hmm?
And that really paid off. History is an interesting thing. It changes sometimes beyond our comprehension. It changes when you're least, unexpected. After Mao died, Deng Xiaoping became the next person in charge of China. And Cultural Revolution era finally was over. And he decided to relaunch a thing called a national entrance examination for college, which was stemmed from the imperial days. The emperor wanted to find the best, smartest person in the nation. He didn't go to his relatives. He would go through that national entrance examination to select the smartest people to be his inner circle, to be his provincial officials. So after the national examination for college, I did really, really well, and I was admitted by the second best university for languages in China called Shanghai Institute of Foreign Languages. And there for 4 years, I worked really, really hard and lived in a dorm, went from the dorm to the library to the classroom. I dug into things like Shakespeare, Chaucer, Spencer, Milton, Thomas
Yeah.
Hardy.
Yes.
And so I had a great time. I did really, really well. I became very romantic because I almost felt myself as a Victorian, lady because I could see myself in those characters.
Yeah.
Anyway, when I graduated, the international tourism exploded in China. So the government assigned me a job to be the cultural and tour guide for the North Americans in Shanghai. So I worked with Americans mostly and also some Canadians for 7 years. My job was taking groups of Americans around China, around my city, and I learned a lot about the United States. I took groups from Smithsonian, Harvard Alumni Association tour. I had a Stanford Alumni Association tours. I took American Book Foundation group to do book donation, and then met Dianne Feinstein as the mayor of San Francisco. I
Oh,
met so many, many Americans that eventually I had this dreamy wish that I wanted to see America,
huh.
where all these people came from. And
Mhm.
so I got admitted to a university in United States called the University of Arizona in Tucson to study communications. So I bought a one-way airline ticket with 2 suitcases and myself and a dream, and ended up in United States.
And you had no problem leaving China or entering, like there weren't any barriers there.
Oh, it was hard to get a visa. It
Yeah.
was first hard to get a passport. One of my, um, how to say, the blood grandfather from my mother's side,
Hmm.
he was, my mother loved him very much, but he died during the Pacific War,
Uh-huh.
in the Pacific Ocean. He
Mm.
had 3 sisters. One of the sisters' son, because my grandfather was a first mate of ocean-going freighters. One of his sister's son went with him aboard the ship. My grandfather was in the United States, around the world,
Hmm.
in the 1930s and 40s. So one of my mother's cousins stayed in New York City, went to the boat. So he sponsored it because I needed a blood relative to
Yes.
get my passport because it was working with foreigners.
That was,
Yes, my uncle, call him Chinese call uncle, even Americans would call like a second cousin, third cousin. He gave me the sponsorship, so I got my passport. So it
good.
was hard to
Yes,
get
I
a
think
visa was very, very hard.
that's
Actually, John McCain, the
yes,
senator of Arizona,
yes,
sent a letter through the diplomatic pouch for me on my behalf,
wonderful.
and yeah, so I ended up getting my visa to
Yeah,
come to United
that's
States.
great. And let me again go back to I love when I can relate to my guests, and I relate to you so, so much. I wanted to be an English teacher, and I thought I would be, and I was an excellent student. And on graduation day, my parents told me they would not support me going to college. They wanted me to stay home and make money for the family. Now, of course, I was so upset, and I was stuck in that house until I married. But of course, you can't get married for the wrong reasons. And to make this short, I finally did go to college when I was 28 years old, and I had 2 children, 4 and 5. I was raising alone without child support. But because I was so poor, the government paid for college. And every single day, it seems, my children tell me, I would say to them, you are going to college. You are going to college. And they'd grow up and they'd say something about their future. And I'd say, you're going to college and then you can do what you want. So you see how we kind of relate there, right? And look
You
how,
are playing my mother's role. That's like what my mother told me because she couldn't go to school.
yes.
She ran away all the way to the West, leaving Shanghai, leaving home behind to build the great West, Chinese West Front. It was also because she was out there. She was actually joining performing companies. She was learning. She was in the acting school, Shanghai Film School. And
Mm,
my grandfather was outraged by her, what she was doing. And he couldn't stop her either because, it was after the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949. So my mother had the freedom. He couldn't stop my mother, but he was, how to say, tracking my mother's every move. My mother
yes.
got so upset. She wanted her independence so badly. She ran away, literally ran away, all the way to the western frontier. But she did not know that the great natural disaster was going to occur. Soviet Union and China relationship soured, and it's because it's such a remote city. In the late 1950s, it was so remote during the Great Famine that of course, the famine, the death started to hit that area a lot earlier than the city of Shanghai.
Yes.
So they witnessed some horrible things before they decided that it was time. They had to, their store closed, that nothing was functioning anymore. They had to run all the way back to the city where they, ran away from. They had to run back to the city. So yeah, school was everything for my mother. So
Yeah.
I felt very lucky. And I feel that your children are very lucky too.
That's because I raised three daughters. They all went to college. They all did well. And I can see the theme in both of our books is about being a strong woman and finding a path to your dream, whether it's with two suitcases and a ticket to America, or fighting off the obstacles of men that think they're superior to you. I loved our conversation. We had a wonderful conversation, Ching. And would you have another project? What's your next? Do you have anything coming up?
Of course, I have been a columnist for the Santa Monica Star for the last 17 years, and I'm continuing writing my news columns. And also, I've been writing quite a bit of short stories about, Chinese in America, American Chinese. And also, I actually wrote many stories about Americans, the old Americans at the end of their lives and how they lived and what they think. And I thought, I do not know why. Maybe I'm seeing myself getting old, but I have a lot of empathy and a lot of understanding. And one of those stories was published online called Abe's Garden. And I also been writing poems. I really enjoy writing poems. I never thought I could because I adore the poets, especially the old English poet laureates, and I felt they were like so heavenly and I could never do anything. But I've been writing a lot of poems myself. And also I've been working on a fictional book. I felt that
Okay.
at this time, after all 20 years working on the nonfiction, and it was not easy. So I'm thinking about writing a book about Chinese women, women
Wonderful.
in the rural area of China and women in the city, the older women versus the younger women. And the characters would go from the rural area to the city, become migrants, and how their lives and feelings. And the people who live in cities have a wonderful life and what their troubles. So you kind of see people all have different troubles and then put together, it will be
Yes.
very dramatic.
And I'm going to give you some information that might help you. And maybe you don't know about it, but I published on Amazon, and Amazon has a section in the Kindle books, and it's called Vella. V is in Victor, Ella. And you can publish episodic stories, one chapter at a time. And what happens is that our Kindle subscribers read those stories with their points. They get points. And after they read so many pages of your stories, you get paid. You get paid royalties. So look into that because you said you have a lot of short stories and poems.
I
Maybe
do actually.
that might be a
That
place.
sounds
Yes, you might
that
publish.
sounds great. That sounds great. So
So
even they would take short stories and poems.
yes. So what you would first do is go to K as in Karen, D as in dog, P as in Paul. That is the app. And then they will take you to the website for Amazon, and they have where you can publish books. But then at the top, they will have Vella. You go to Vella, explore that one day when you have some time.
Fantastic. I would have loved that.
Yeah, I love I love that women share information and help each other. That's why I do the show. And I loved having you. And I wish we had even more time to talk. I'm sure if I lived closer, we would be friends.
I think so. I think so. It's lovely talking to you, and keep your sunshine on your face and enjoying life, because I do believe that it's our choice. We can soak ourselves in vinegar, or we can just be a nice flying balloon and receive the sun, receive the air, and
Yes.
be out there.
I so agree. And I will have you again in the future on the show if you'd like, because I think there's so many things we can talk about. So once again, all of your information will be on the show notes, and people can watch on the podcast. It's called Be Heard, Empower Yourself. Watch. They can listen, and they can watch on the YouTube Be Heard, Empower Yourself. Thank you. And I hope my listeners got a lot out of this conversation. I know I did. Okay. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye, everybody.